All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to Understanding the Basics of Pennsylvania Ag Exemptions for Inheritance Tax and Other Real Estate Transfers. My name is Audrey Thompson. I'm a staff attorney here with the Penn State Center for Agricultural and Shale Law. The Understanding Agricultural Law educational series is a course designed to provide subject matter literacy and competence on fundamental issues of agricultural law to attorneys and business advisors who work with or represent ag or rural clients, but who may not specialize in agricultural law. This series is sponsored by the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture's Ag Business Development Center, established in the 2019 Pennsylvania Farm Bill. The Agricultural Business Development Center aims to enhance the long-term vitality of Pennsylvania farms by supporting farm transitions, both from generation to generation and from conventional to organic farming, supporting beginning farmers, providing risk management education, and providing financial assistance through grants and low-interest loans. Next slide, please. And next slide one more time. Perfect. We've covered numerous topics in the Understanding Agricultural Law education program, including ag labor, finance, conservation, Pennsylvania's Clean and Green, and many, many more. You can find recordings and materials for all of those programs on our Understanding Ag Law landing page on our website at aglaw.psu.edu. And next slide, please. We encourage you to mark your calendars and register for our upcoming programs. Under this Understanding Agricultural Law educational series, we have the Migrant and Seasonal, Understanding the Basics of the Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Worker Protection Act on May 30th at the end of this month. Then in June, on June 27th, we've got Pennsylvania's Clean and Green Program, County Level Administration. July 25th, we've got ADA compliance for agritourism operations. And then on August 22nd, we're going to talk about foreign agricultural land ownership laws. All of those programs are on Friday at noon Eastern Time, and attorney CLE is available for each program. You can register from the Understanding Ag Law landing page or on our events page from our website. And we've got both of those in the chat there. Next slide. Oops. I'm going to do this one more time. Oops. Perfect. Okay. Then we've got our quarterly dairy legal webinar series, and our next webinar under that program is going to be Tuesday, July 15th. We'll cover the second quarter of 2025, and the focus topic on that is going to be the 2025 Federal Milk Marketing Order reforms. That program will also be at noon Eastern Time, and attorney CLE is available for that program as well. Next slide, please. And we've got two programs this summer lined up with our partner, the National Ag Law Center, on May 21st. Staff Attorney Jackie Schweickler is going to present Navigating ADA Compliance for Agritourism Guests. And then on June 18th, our Center Director Ross Pifer is going to present an overview of state grain dealer statutes in the United States. I will let you know, the information presented is going to be outstanding, absolutely, undoubtedly, but attorney CLE is not available for those programs. Next slide, please. And finally, one last plug here. Put one more thing in the chat. Registration is available now for our 2025 Agricultural Law Symposium on Thursday, September 18th, 2025. That's going to be in person at University Park, Penn State Dickinson Law. Lunch and refreshments will be provided. We're going to provide 6 attorney CLE credits for that entire program. Tentative topics, we're still fleshing out the program, but we're looking at ag labor, Pennsylvania Acre Right to Farm, environmental natural resources, agribusiness issues, 2025 Ag Law Update, and more. So we're still working on the exact programming, but registration is available. You can get the early bird pricing right now. That'll be available until August 29th. That's $150 for attorneys requesting CLE, $100 for non-attorneys, and then $25 for students. More information is available at the webpage there. So don't delay, register, and reserve your spot for the Pennsylvania Ag Law Symposium today. Next slide, please. And one more thing before I turn this webinar over. This webinar is being recorded. If you have any questions, please write them in the Q&A feature, and I will collect them and ask them at the end. In fact, there's going to be a pretty extensive, because we're talking about the inheritance tax exemptions here. There'll be a spot for people to maybe mention if you've had experience with this or ask further questions. Definitely, we'd like to hear those questions, please, so put them in the chat. We encourage you to fill out the poll at the end of the webinar. Tell us what you like, where we can improve, what topics you'd like to see in the future. And if you want us to submit this program for free CLE to the Pennsylvania CLE board, or we can send you an attendance certificate that you can submit to an out-of-state CLE board, there's a CLE form listed both on the material page for this webinar and separately here in the chat. You need to fill out that form to get your credits. As part of our responsibility to ensure attendance, we will provide a code word later in the program. You need to enter that code word into the form. If you're calling in or some reason you do not have access to the CLE form, send me an email. I see one here at aet17@psu.edu. That's Alpha Echo Tango 17, AET17. Send me an email. I'll fix your problem. And okay, here we go. All right. Now I will turn this webinar over to Ross Pifer. Ross serves as the director of the Center for Agricultural and Shale Law and is a clinical professor of law at Penn State Dickinson Law, where he teaches property, oil and gas law, and agricultural law, and coordinates the Rural Economic Development Clinic. Ross, the screen is yours for understanding the basics of Pennsylvania ag exemptions for inheritance tax and other real estate transfers.
Okay, thank you, Audrey. Good afternoon, everyone. And we're going to spend most of the time today talking about the PA Ag exemptions for inheritance tax. There are a couple other somewhat related issues relating to real estate transfers and some ag exemptions. So I'll touch on some of that towards the end of the program. So this is an outline for what we're going to cover over the next hour. I'll start just by giving a brief overview of PA inheritance tax, just to kind of set the stage for what exactly these ag exemptions are providing, exactly what benefits they're providing, and then we'll spend the bulk of the hour talking about the second item on the outline, talking about two specific agricultural exemptions, and then talking to a lesser extent about a family-owned business exemption, which is not unique to agriculture, but it does have some application to agricultural businesses. Then after we discuss that, then we're going to move on to talk briefly about a beginning farmer tax credit in Pennsylvania, as well as some transfer tax exclusions that apply to Pennsylvania agricultural properties. And then finally, to the extent that we have time, I'm very interested in any comments that any of you have as you have utilized these exemptions. They're relatively new. There's not any case law on them. And I know we often have people in the audience that have a lot of experience, and I am very interested in hearing what your experience is. So you could either provide that through the chat, or we can, if you raise your hand, we can unmute you and let you discuss the experiences that you have. Okay, so moving into to kind of a very, very high level view of inheritance tax in Pennsylvania. I guess at a foundational level, a Pennsylvania inheritance tax return, along with the corresponding payment of the tax due, it's required for all decedents who have property subject to tax, which would be all decedents that are residents of Pennsylvania that have tax, as well as out-of-state residents that have Pennsylvania or certain Pennsylvania property. So that inheritance tax return is generally, it's going to be filed by the personal representative. There may be some situations where there is no personal representative that has been appointed, and in that case, then the person to whom the property is being transferred would have the obligation to pay that tax, or if for whatever reason, if the property that's being transferred wasn't included on the inheritance tax return, then the transferee of the property would have an obligation to report that. And this inheritance tax return must be filed within 9 months. I almost said 9 years. Within 9 months of the decedent's date of death. Now there is a provision that allows for a 6-month extension, but generally speaking, 9 months is the time period that the personal representative has within which to file that inheritance tax return and to pay the tax that is due. This inheritance tax return, it's filed in the appropriate county register of wills office. So that's, whatever, if the decedent is a resident of, or was a resident of Pennsylvania, then that inheritance tax return is going to be filed in their county, the county recorder or register's office. And then again, that tax that's owed as calculated by the personal representative, that's going to be paid at the time, generally at the time that the return is filed. There is a provision to pay the tax early, and a 5% discount can be obtained if it's paid within 3 months after the date of death. But the standard process is the return is filed 9 months. Within 9 months, the tax that's due is paid at that time. Now, the rate at which property is taxed depends upon who is receiving that property. And I'll show you the forms in a little bit to maybe illustrate this a little bit more, or a little bit better. But since the year 2000, the tax rates haven't changed. And prior to that, the rates generally were a little bit higher, and from time to time they would change. But over the last 25 years, the spousal rate is zero. So there is no inheritance tax that is owed. There's still an obligation to file a return, but no tax is owed if it's being transferred to a surviving spouse. Similarly, property that is transferred to a minor child, with minority being 21 years of age, transferred to a minor child is at 0%. And if the decedent is less than 21 years old, then a transfer to the parents, it would be at a 0% rate as well. Now, as you kind of move out a little bit on the familial chain, lineal descendants or ancestors are taxed at a 4.5%, or property being transferred to those lineal descendants or ancestors is at a 4.5% rate. So children, grandchildren, parents, grandparents, up and down that lineal line is at 4.5%. If you're transferring, or if property is being transferred to siblings of the decedent, it's 12%. And then anyone else would be 15. So if it's being transferred to a niece, a nephew, an uncle, a cousin, or somebody that's unrelated, it's going to be at a 15% rate. So just to kind of put that, today we're talking about ag exemptions to this inheritance tax. So if you had a farm that had a value at the time of a decedent's death of, say, $1 million, just for a nice round number, without an exemption, if that farm valued at $1 million is being transferred to the decedent's children, a Pennsylvania inheritance tax of $45,000, which is 4.5% of $1 million. So $45,000 would be owed. If that farm is being transferred, the entirety, I'm assuming that the entirety of the state is in that farm. But if that estate, the entirety of the estate is being transferred to siblings, now there is an inheritance tax of $120,000. And so, it's a significant amount. And if you have a working farm, this could definitely be an impediment to the continued viability of that farm, having this payment of inheritance tax that is required. And so that's where we step in, or start to look at the ag exemptions and the impact that they have. But just before we go there, I have the next few slides just are cut and paste of the typical inheritance tax form. This is the REV 1500 for a resident decedent, so a resident of Pennsylvania that passes away. And this is the this, I think I have 3 slides in here. This is the second page of this particular form, but you can see what is being done here in this recapitulation. We're totaling um, different types of assets. We're totaling the value of different types of assets. And then at the bottom, you can see we have a total of all of the gross assets. Now, underneath that, on that second page of the REV 1500, we now have deductions that can be taken out. So the costs of estate administration, the debts of the decedent, the funeral expenses, those are reduced to give us in line 12 the net value of the estate. Then there may be some charitable bequests which are not taxed, so we remove those, and in line 14 we get the net value of the estate that is subject to tax. Now, once we know what the estate's valuation is, now we have to figure out how do we apply those different percentages that I provided a few slides ago. So, if all of that estate is going to the spouse, then you would fill in here on line 15 a 0% rate, and there would be no tax that is owed. If the property is being transferred to different people or to people within different classes. So let's say some property is being transferred to the spouse, some property is being transferred to a lineal descendant, some property is being transferred to a sibling. You would have to figure out the applicable, the amount of the value of the property that is being transferred to that particular class of people, the appropriate percentage, and then you calculate the total amount of tax that is due. And that would be what the personal representative would pay at that 9-month date after death. Okay, so now moving into the ag exemptions. So there are 2 major ag exemptions that we're going to talk about. And I'd mentioned there's a third one that has application to ag, but is much broader substantively. So the 2 ag exemptions, we have the business of agriculture. I have agricultural on the slide. It should be business of agriculture exemption, and then the farmland other, or what's referred to as the farmland other by the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue. In some earlier documentation, shortly after this was enacted, the Department of Revenue referred to this farmland other exemption as the farmland commodities, easements, and reserves exemption. Farmland other is, much more concise. Neither of these terms entirely capture what is being done in this exemption, but farmland other is the term that I think is generally used for that. So let's start by well, I guess just highlighting when these exemptions came about. And the business of agriculture and the farmland other were established in 2012 in legislation that had that addressed a number of other tax issues, but that is when these exemptions were provided. So about 13 years ago. Then the following year, the family-owned business exemption was provided. And then a few years after that, in 2016, there were some amendments to address a few issues in all 3 of these exemptions. Okay, so the farmland other exemption. There really are 3 different eligibility requirements for that. The language that is on the PowerPoint, this is the language that comes directly out of the statute. So first, there has to be a transfer of eligible, I'll say land, but we also have commodity. So there has to be a transfer of an eligible asset, and we'll talk about each of these terms in the following slide. But a transfer of an agricultural commodity, an agricultural conservation easement, agricultural reserve, agricultural use property, or a forest reserve. So that's the first eligibility requirement, the transfer of an eligible asset. The second requirement is that it is to or for the benefit of lineal descendants or siblings. Okay, so that's the, who is getting the property. To qualify for this particular exemption, it must be a lineal descendant or a sibling. And then finally, there is a requirement that the property be reported on a timely filed inheritance tax return. So again, that 9-month time period, the personal representative is going to have to comply with that 9-month period, or if there's an extension, the 15-month time period in order to receive this exemption. Okay, so let's talk now about the eligible property. And again, we have these 5 different types of property, or 5 different transfers of 5 different types of property that are going to qualify for this farmland other exemption. And the first of those is agricultural commodities. So, this is certainly not farmland, but it is defined in the statute as any and all plant and animal products, including Christmas trees, produced in this Commonwealth for commercial purposes. So, any plant or animal. So this could be cows or other livestock. It could be crops that have been harvested. So that is the agricultural commodity. The second type of asset that is going to qualify is an agricultural conservation easement, and this is just referring to, in terms of defining it, it's referring to the ag area security law. So if there is property subject to a conservation easement, that is going to qualify. Now, the next 3 types of assets, ag reserve, ag use, forest reserve, we're kind of carrying over the concepts from the Clean and Green statute, in terms of these 3 types of property. So, ag reserve, this is land that doesn't have to be used for agricultural production right now. It's open space, used for outdoor recreation to enjoy natural resources. It has to be open to the public without charge, and can't be, you can't discriminate in terms of how that is being provided or opened to the public. Then we have agricultural use property, so land that is used to produce an agricultural commodity, or if it's enrolled in a federal conservation program. And then finally, the last type of qualifying asset, forest reserve. So if you have 10 or more acres of trees that's producing timber or other wood products. So those are the type of assets that qualify. Now, for the second and third requirements under the statute, to or for the benefit of lineal descendants or siblings. So this language, or for the benefit of, allows for trusts. So if there are trusts, where family members that are solely benefiting family members, then a transfer into that trust would qualify for this exemption, the same as if the property were transferred to individuals. And then finally, we have the requirement of the timely filing of the report. Okay, so this farmland other exemption, it's fairly straightforward. And the biggest benefit, which you'll understand a little bit more as I talk about the next exemption, is that with this farmland other exemption, there is no ongoing reporting requirement. So it's the exemption is listed on the inheritance tax report. It's approved. If it's approved by the Department of Revenue, you're done. Nothing else is required. Now, what are the limitations for this exemption? It might not cover all assets. It is it's covering land. It's covering the commodities and the land. It's not covering structures. It's not covering equipment. And so those are, to the extent that the decedent has assets that are involved in structures or equipment, then we're going to have to look at the business of agriculture exemption to see if those are going to be exempt. And then additionally, a limitation on this exemption is that it might not cover everyone that is thought to be a family member. A lot of farm operations, there may be cousins involved, nieces, nephews, and they aren't going to be covered under this. It's just lineal descendants and siblings. Okay, moving into the business of agriculture exemption. And so this is the eligibility requirements as listed in the statute, that we have a transfer of real estate devoted to the business of agriculture to or for the benefit of members of the same family. And now we have that ongoing obligation for a 7-year period. This property must continue to be devoted to the business of agriculture. And there is a minimum gross annual income threshold. It's a small threshold or a low threshold of $2,000, but nevertheless there is an income requirement. So let's look at what is meant by the business of agriculture. And I think it's somewhat intuitive what is the business of agriculture, but just to highlight that if you have leases, let's say that there is an entity that has been created and there is farmland that's being leased to a family corporation or LLC, that's going to qualify. If, however, the individual is leasing land to a non-family member, to a third party, then that's not considered to be the business of agriculture. So if you had, if the decedent owned 100 acres of agricultural land that they rented out to a third party, that 100-acre parcel would not meet the requirements for the business of agriculture. So if there is leasing, that leasing has to be done to members of the same family or to an entity that's owned by members of the same family. Okay, the business of agriculture, it doesn't include these activities that are listed on the screen. Recreational activities, game animals, game birds, cats, dogs, fur farming, stockyards or slaughterhouses. And, I think this last one may be significant, that if there are manufacturing or processing operations, that is not considered to be the business of agriculture. So that property would not qualify for this exemption. Okay, so that's the requirement in terms of what is the business of agriculture. Now we have the definition of members of the same family, and you can see that this is fairly broad, much broader than the farmland other exemption. So give you a little bit of time to read this, but we're talking about siblings, as well as going up to the generation of the decedent's parents and grandparents, and all of the descendants of those parents and grandparents, and siblings of those parents and grandparents. And so, just to kind of break down that prior slide, I think second cousins would be considered members of the same family. Certainly, we're going up and down the lineal chain for ancestors and descendants, and the issue of where you have a second, because frequently you'll have a second to die spouse who will want to convey property back to the relatives of the first to die spouse. That is covered under this definition as well. Step relatives, I'm not quite so sure. Looking at the language, I can read that both ways in terms of whether they would be included or not under this definition. You might have opinions as to how you see it falling. Okay, so now this business of agriculture exemption, I mentioned that there is this 7 year requirement post the date of death that the land has to continue to qualify and has to continue to meet that 2000 annual gross income threshold. If it is not, if it does not, if the property does not meet that requirement, then there needs to be a payment of the inheritance tax that would have been due at the date of death plus interest. And the payment of that tax, it's a lien in favor of the Commonwealth, and it's also a personal obligation of whoever owned that property at the time that it became ineligible, at the time that it was no longer that it no longer met the requirements of business the business of agriculture. Okay, and it's in terms of that reporting requirement, in terms of the requirement that the land qualify for the business of agriculture for 7 years, um, the owner of the property has to provide or has to respond to a form from the Department of Revenue on an annual basis, and that form is sent by the Department of Revenue each July, and then the owner of the property has to return that by February 15th of each year. So that process needs to continue for a 7 year time period where the owner of the property is that received the exemption is going to have to certify that yes, they are still engaged in the business of agriculture. They still are receiving $2,000 each year. Okay, so we talked about, I guess we've talked about these requirements now. So we have the transfer of real estate devoted to the business of agriculture. It's between members of the same family. We have the 7 year ongoing requirement. We have the minimum income threshold, and we have the timely filing of an inheritance tax return. Okay, so just looking at this exemption, very broadly. So what are the benefits and the limitations of it? When you compare this to the agricultural or to the farmland other exemption, this is much broader in terms of what real estate is going to be encompassed by it, because generally a residence and structures are going to be covered under this exemption. Now, if structures are used for a non-agricultural purpose, they're not included, but a residence is considered to be part of the business of agriculture, and structures like barns or machine sheds, garages, chicken coops, things like that, that are part of the business of agriculture, those are going to be receive, those properties are going to receive that exemption. So the definition of real estate is broader under the business of agriculture exemption, and the definition of family is broader under the business of agriculture exemption. So those are definitely pluses over the farmland other exemption. Now, what are the limitations or the downsides on the business of agriculture exemption? I think the biggest downside is this ongoing reporting requirement. So for a 7 year period, I mean, I guess it's not just the reporting requirement, but it's the requirement that this property must maintain its eligibility. So you have to look ahead and say or think about how is this property going to be used in the future. Now, another limitation, and this limitation is also true with the farmland other, but it only applies to, well, let me take that back, because the farmland other does apply to ag commodities, but this business of agriculture is just real estate. And so if you have, livestock, that's not going to fall under the business of agriculture exemption. If you have machinery or equipment, that's not going to fall under this exemption. It only applies to real estate. Okay, so just to kind of highlight a little bit of the I guess the legislative process. I mentioned that both of those ag exemptions that I talked about were enacted in 2012, and then there was an amendment in 2016. And what that 2016 amendments did, um, they expanded the members of the same family to address that second to die spouse transferring property to relatives of the first to die spouse. They also allowed for transfers to trusts, which I mentioned, and that requirement was made retroactive to 2012. And so, we're probably beyond the time period now where this is going to have much application, but for decedents that died between 2012 and 2016, where there was a transfer to a trust, that that transfer did not qualify for the exemptions at the time, but then in 2016, with the passage of this amendment, it now did, and it was retroactive. So there was the opportunity to amend those inheritance tax returns, and then also in 2016, the timely filing requirement was added for these exemptions. Okay, so from a procedural standpoint, to claim these exemptions, there's a Schedule AU that must be completed and submitted as part of the PA inheritance tax return. There also is a requirement that the personal representative provide a written statement explaining in detail how the property, the assets qualify for the claimed exemption. And also, there's a requirement to attach the copy of the county assessment card and a copy of the deed. Now, I have a few slides showing forms again, and this is the front page of the resident decedent inheritance tax return. And as you look at the bottom of this, or towards the bottom of this form, you'll see in number 5 the agricultural exemption. So if there is a transfer that the personal representative is claiming the exemption for, you have to check that box number 5. And then this is the next few slides are cut and pastes of excerpts of this Schedule AU, and you can see that at the kind of the top of that form, it indicates the time period 2012 is when this exemption became effective. You'll see right below that a listing of the 3 pieces of information that I referenced earlier: the written statement, the assessment card, and the deed. And then you have the exemption type, and I'm gonna advance to the next slide so we can see both exemption types. You have the business of agriculture exemption and the farmland other exemption. So the personal representative needs to check the appropriate box or boxes and indicate which exemption is being claimed. And then for that business of agriculture, you're checking boxes indicating that you meet each of those eligibility requirements. So you're going to have to check all of those boxes. And then for the farmland other exemption, you're going to check, or I guess not check, you're going to fill in the oval for the appropriate asset that the asset that's being transferred that you're claiming to be is exempt. And then continuing down on that form, you can see that this is information that has to be completed for either of those exemptions, and you're writing the property. Now, um, I mentioned this is very much focused on real estate. However, farmland other also includes ag commodities. So, remember that it's not just about farmland. It also covers ag commodities. But you can see here in section 1, you have a percentage of land to be exempted, a percentage of structures to be exempted. So if you are claiming the farmland other exemption, um, if it is just farmland, you would be claiming that 100% of that farmland would be exempted. If there are structures on that parcel, those do not qualify for the farmland other, so you would have to indicate that 0% of those structures were to be exempted. Now, if you were claiming the business of agriculture exemption, the only structures you would be exempting would be those structures that are not being used in the business of agriculture. Okay, and here again, for the business of agriculture, you have to list those structures and list how they're being, or describe how they are being used and why they qualify. And you see this notation at the bottom that if they don't qualify, then you're going to have to value them and report them on some other form or some other schedule on your inheritance tax return. Okay, so we talked about the two strictly ag exemptions, the farmland other and the business of agriculture. Now, there is a third exemption that may have application to ag businesses, and that's the family-owned business exemption. And so, when you think about what qualifies and what doesn't qualify for the farmland other and the business of agriculture exemptions, you can see that there are assets that a farm may have that are not going to be covered under those exemptions. And so, I think from a process of analyzing, how do you know which exemption to choose? I think, I would start with the point that farmland other has no ongoing reporting requirement. And so that's the most desirable to use for whatever you can use it for. But it's not going to cover structures. So maybe that pushes you to say, and also the family, your transferees may be to a broader family than what's covered by that farmland other exemption. So if assets aren't, or if transfers of assets aren't covered under the farmland other, then you can look at the business of agriculture. But you still might have assets that aren't covered, such as equipment and machinery, or there may be some other non-real estate based assets. And that's where I think you're gonna look at this family-owned business exemption. I'm not going to go into as much detail on this as I did the prior two exemptions, but just to kind of hit the highlights of this exemption. To be a qualified family-owned business interest, it has to be less than 50 full-time equivalent employees. So, you can still have a pretty decent sized operation, but there is a certain size at which you're not going to qualify, and assets have to be under 5 million. It has to be in existence for 5 years prior to the date of death. If there is an entity that's involved, that entity has to be wholly owned by the decedent or members of the same family. And we do have that 7-year post-death compliance period. You fill out and request the exemption 6 months, or excuse me, 9 months after the date of death, but then you have to continue to make sure that you comply, and you're going to have to continue to report that for a 7-year time period. So, that is a downside of this exemption. Here is Again, another slide showing the inheritance tax resident decedent form, and oops, and you can see at the bottom there is an oval number 6 for family-owned business exemption. So if you're claiming that exemption, you check that form, and then you fill out this Schedule CSB for the small business exemption, where you provide all of the requested information about the family business. Okay, so those are the inheritance tax exemptions that I wanted to talk about. Now I want to talk a little bit about some tax credits and some transfer tax provisions that apply to agriculture. So beginning in 2019, the General Assembly established the PA Beginning Farmer Tax Credit. I have the statutory site here on the screen at 72 PS 8801H to 8807H. And what this program does is it provides a state income tax credit to a seller or lessor of agricultural assets to a qualifying beginning farmer. So this is essentially providing an incentive to the seller or lessor to deal with a qualifying beginning farmer. So the benefits are provided at this point. The benefits are provided not, or the direct benefits are not provided to the beginning farmer, but rather to someone to provide an incentive to deal with the qualifying beginning farmer. And so just a couple key definitions, what are agricultural assets? It's pretty broad. Land, livestock, facilities, building, machinery, all of those are going to be considered agricultural assets. So if they are sold, if they are leased to a qualifying beginning farmer, the tax credit is, there's eligibility for that. Now, what is required to be considered a beginning farmer? You have to have demonstrated interest in ag or a related field. You have been receiving income from ag for 10 or less years. So that's basically the time threshold for a beginning farmer is 10 years. You intend to provide a majority of the labor and management on the farm, and then you have to be certified. You have to have your status as a beginning farmer certified by DCED, the Department of Community and Economic Development. So just important to recognize or to note that this is a program that is administered by DCED, not by the Department of Agriculture. And then finally, in terms of an eligibility requirement, the beginning farmer can't be a partner, member, or shareholder of the entity that they're purchasing or leasing from. So you can't have, if someone is a member of an LLC, the LLC owns the land, and the LLC is going to rent that land to the individual, that wouldn't meet the requirements, because you can't have those kind of inside transactions. Okay, so the process to receive this credit, both sides of the transaction have to be certified by DCED, or that transaction has to be certified in order to generate that tax credit that's going to be awarded. Now, the beginning farmers, they can be certified prior to the transaction. So that's going to kind of speed up the process if they can get that certification ahead of time. And it is a 3-year certification. It can be extended through a recertification. And the beginning farmer can, they're not limited to one transaction. So they can engage in transactions with multiple sellers or lessors. Here is the form, which is the certification that the beginning farmer has to fill out. And you can go, and this information is available on DCED's website. And you can also find out on their website a list of all of the farmers that have basically are pre-certified. So these are people that if you're the prospective seller or lessor, and you want to receive this credit and you want to sell or lease to someone that is going to qualify so you can receive that credit, you can go to DCED's website, look at the list, and you can see who has already been certified. Okay, in terms of the actual tax credit, DCED is going to work with the Department of Revenue to issue that credit. The seller or lessor, in order to receive the credit, they have to be current on all their state tax obligations. And these credits, they're not refundable or transferable. They can't be carried forward. So some of you may be familiar with the REAP program, which provides state income tax credits for farmers to implement conservation practices. And in that program, the tax credits can be transferred, they can be carried forward, but those attributes of the tax credit are not available at this point for this beginning farmer tax credit. And the amount of the credit, I've just quoted the statutory language here that the credit can be 5% of the sale of an asset, up to an asset that is valued at $32,000. So $1,600 is if my math is correct, that's the cap. And for a lease, it can be 10% of the income for each of the first 3 years of an agreement that has a value of $7,000 a year. So it'd be $700. The credit would be a maximum of $700 per year. Okay, this program, it's authorized through 2029. It is authorized to be funded at a level of $6 million each year. The unused funds can be carried forward. And there is a requirement in the statute that DCED provide a report to the General Assembly no later than February 1st. I've not seen that report or don't know if that report was filed at that point, but that would give some indication of how much has this program been utilized. The report was supposed to give information on the background of the farmers, the geographic distribution of the tax credits, the disallowance of the tax credits, to kind of provide a snapshot in terms of the impact of this program. Okay, so we got 7 minutes left. So just real quickly, there are a few transfer tax exclusions that I think you should be aware of. On the topic of beginner farmers, so we have an exclusion for a transfer of real estate that is subject to an ag conservation easement under the Ag Area Security Law to a qualified beginner farmer. So that might be a fairly narrow class, because you have to meet the eligibility of being a beginner farmer, and it also has to be land that has a conservation, a purchase of ag conservation easement, or enrolled in the purchase of ag conservation easement program. And this term qualified beginner farmer, it's defined very similarly to the qualified beginning farmer under the tax credit program that I just talked about. Okay, and then also, just this program, or this exclusion was established in 2019, and I have the statutory site for that here. This statutory provision, this 8102C.3, this is what lists all of the transfer tax exclusions, and I would encourage you to take a look at that list to see if there's anything else that applies. You can see number 19, number 20. These have application to ag businesses when they're being transferred into an entity or being transferred among different family members. So I'd encourage you to just take a look through that entire list, because there are some other provisions that have some application more limited application to agriculture as well. So with that, I will wrap things up, open it up to questions.
Okay, well, we are at 1:03, so we'll wrap it up here. So thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. Have a wonderful Mother's Day and Graduation Day weekend. If anyone is partaking in that, we are here at Penn State. So thanks again. And the next dates are up on the screen. So I hope to see you in a couple weeks.